Hello everyone, welcome back to the Analyst for 3rd of January 2024, where we will be trying to understand the most important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Now we find in the table of contents, the very first article is regarding an editorial by an former ambassador to India by the name of Global Nuclear Order. And here we will be trying to understand what is it and the very basics of the same. In the next one, we will be looking at Indian slums and how it evolved over a period of time, the various perspectives relating the same. In the next one, we will be looking what is the Square Kilometre Array Observatory and how it is one of the largest space program related to radio telescope observatories all around the world and how Indian government is taking a part in the same. In the next one, we will be looking at the recent RBI guidelines regarding the inoperative accounts. And finally, we will be concluding the session with what is a designated terrorist, because recently a gangster has been designated as a designated terrorist under the UAPA provisions. Now, starting with the very first article, we find that this is a beautifully written editorial by Rakesh Sood, who was a former diplomat of India. And I encourage my viewers to generously read such editorials, particularly for two things. For one, obviously the facts and information that is relevant for the UPSC examination. Secondly, such articles written in such a beautiful manner will be expanding our horizons as to how to properly write a good essay. So that is why you should be trying to read such articles firstly, and then you can come and watch the analyst videos, because such editorials will be expanding our horizons. Now, coming to the editorial, the context is that according to the author, the global nuclear order is changing over a period of time, and that is why there are various issues arising out of the same. We will be discussing the same in this particular discussion, and this is very relevant for our GS2, where we need to look at the various policies and politics of developed countries and developing countries in context of India's interests. And let me tell you, nuclear field or nuclear diplomacy is one of those policies that are related to the same. Now here, let us first go through the various basic words or various basic keywords in the nuclear discourse on the international relation arena. Now here we have to understand that the nuclear weapons is the very basic keyword and the very first keyword to start this discussion, because without nuclear weapons this particular discussion would not exist. Now, what is nuclear weapon? Nuclear weapon is a particular weapon of mass destruction which is designed by various countries to have them in their arsenal, or say military arsenal, right? Now we know the origin of the nuclear weapons can be traced back to the end of the World War II, right? When the US developed or say engineered the nuclear weapons for dropping them on the Japanese islands of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We know the aftermath of the same. But after that, the world came to know about the nuclear weapons and how they are very important for one's military strategic importance. Now here, another word is very important to understand this context, that is global order. What is global order? We must have heard about this term in newspapers and editorials almost on a day-to-day basis, because we have to understand that the very fabric of international relations is very important right now, right? And under those fabric there are military, there are economic, there are social, there are political connotations, and everything, right? Every single major component, every single major stakeholder, various nations, right? They come together to form an order. Or it can be simplified in a sentence and told that global order is an arrangement of power and influence on the global stage. So we find, I told that there are various dimensions: political dimension, social, military, economic dimensions. So we find that there are few countries such as the US. Former, it was the Soviet or the USSR, or present day Russia. Right now it is the US, China, right, who are kind of shaping the global order due to their military power, economic power, political power, and so on. Next, we have to find that what are the factors influencing the global order right now. Generally, we have to understand to bring an order, right? To bring an order, to bring a particular equilibrium or harmonium in across the international politics, we need particular convergence among the major powers, right? Otherwise, it will not be an order, it will be disorder. Such as the things or say the world that we see right now. Our world is right now is not in a perfect order. We have various nations in conflict with each other. We have major powers such as US and China who are in power tussles between themselves. We have powers such as Russia and US who are in constant disagreements between various treaties and so on. So we have to understand that to have a particular global order, there must be convergence between the major global powers of the day. Next, we have to understand there is another factor which is influencing the global order, which is how they successfully present the global outcome or say global order as a public good to the rest of the world, or how they can convince the entire world that this particular global order is same for all of the world and it is actually serving as a global public good, because we have various goods, right, which is available all over the world, such as the goods that are being traded, exported. We also have law, order. We also need to have some proper global order which can also be serving as a global public good. Now, the next key term is the nuclear weapon states. Nuclear weapon states as of now are 9. The US, Russia, the UK, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel and North Korea. So these are the countries who have officially declared nuclear weapons, right? And we can understand over the last 3 terms, right, nuclear weapons, global order and nuclear weapon states, we can understand that the very act of having nuclear weapon is setting a kind of a global order, right? And that particular global order is known as global nuclear order, or the very ability of countries to have nuclear weapons and the very order that it designates. So this is the particular thing or say definition of global nuclear order. And here there are other various key terms such as nuclear deterrence, or the ability of a country to have nuclear weapons, and the very virtue of having nuclear weapons is actually giving us signals or giving a number of signals to your neighboring nations, to your enemy nations, who will be aware of the fact that you will be having nuclear weapons. For example, if we take the case of India and Pakistan, both of them are nuclear countries. So we can say that in any act of aggression by India or Pakistan or vice versa, the very act of having nuclear weapons can limit or say reduce the number of say aggressions by the two nations, because we know that if any act of nuclear weapon is inflicted on the other nation, the disaster will be very, very high. And second, the reciprocal or the response from the enemy state will also be very, very dangerous. That is why having nuclear weapons is actually like having a deterrence. Next, arms control. In the global world right now, right, the supplies of nuclear weapons, the supply of raw materials for those nuclear weapons is actually in the advanced nations generally. And generally what the advanced nations did is they formed a coalition to limit that export of nuclear technologies to other nations. That particular thing is known as the arms control, and that is generally done by nations who have the nuclear weapons, right? If they have the nuclear weapons, they can actually limit the development, right, and deployment or say the use of nuclear weapons. And if the countries that do not have nuclear weapons, the countries which have cannot export the same to the countries which do not have nuclear weapons. That is actually what is known as arms control, and also closely follows the same or a different keyword that is known as non-proliferation. This is actually known as preventing the spread of nuclear weapons and materials to additional states. So this is just an extension of the arms control. We find that non-proliferation is actually that particular condition where countries cannot export their technologies to other nations. This is a keyword. And finally, we have another keyword, it is actually known as nuclear disarmament. This is actually regarding the reducing and eventually eliminating the existing nuclear weapons stockpiles. For example, say we have 9 countries which have nuclear weapons in the entire world. Now, disarmament actually refers that all these countries will be halting their development of nuclear weapons and will also be eliminating them over a period of time. Say by destroying them, say by burying them, by whatever means, they have to be eliminating, because nuclear weapons anywhere is a threat to peace everywhere. And that is why in many of the international treaties relating to nuclear weapons, this is one of the ultimate objectives, that the world will be having a disarmament principle with respect to nuclear weapons. And now let us just follow a brief background as to how this global nuclear order came to being. The very first roots can be seen actually during the Cold War, when the US, after having demonstrated the nuclear bomb over Japanese islands, right, it started developing nuclear weapons to increase its global power. Now, just after the end of the World War, the USSR would also rise as the second pole of the entire world. At one pole, this would be the Western forces led by the US. At the other pole, it would be the socialist forces led by the USSR. And after the development of, say, the nuclear weapons by the US, the USSR would also do the same. They also increased their deployment of nuclear weapons. Eventually, this was actually seen as an aftermath of the Cold War, or during the Cold War. And the height of the nuclear tensions between these two particular nations was actually culminated during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Russian nuclear stockpiles came as near to the US coast as Cuba, right? And that is when the two nations became very, very concerned. They became very concerned as if there would be any nuclear conflict between either, say, US or USSR, not only these two nations will be affected, but the entire world will be affected. So that is why the presidents of the two nations, the USSR and the US, they agreed to establish back channel, or say background conversations, not say non-official conversations, establishing telephone hotline to reduce this Cuban Missile Crisis. Eventually this was reduced, but the nation of Cuba would be affected. But that is a different conversation for a different day. But here, the main observations that came outside the Cuban Missile Crisis, we have to understand, is twofold. First, the two presidents and the entire world, they realized that we need a bilateral mechanism, or a mechanism which is involving 2 or more countries, right? For what? For preventing tensions from arising from nuclear weapons. Because we have to understand, we have to limit nuclear weapons, not say have more and more nuclear weapons. And having them is dangerous, because in control of any dictator, in control of any, say, non-democratic government, these can wreak havoc. And also, nuclear weapons are dangerous, it is a fact, and therefore their spread should be curbed. So based on these two particular highlights, in 1968, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was actually signed, right? And here it was, stated that the proliferation of the nuclear weapons will be halted. And that is why I introduced you to all the key terms before. And here, another, or say the third major development would be seen in 1975, and it would be us only, India only, who will be demonstrating India's own nuclear power by conducting a nuclear test in 1974. India, undertook an activity which is known as peaceful nuclear explosion, which generally means that India is demonstrating that India is not behind in developing the nuclear weapons, because India needs deterrence. India needs nuclear deterrence, because India is facing, by 1974, India already had a war with China, with Pakistan, right? With, and also the liberation of Bangladesh would also take place during this. So India knows that it has hostile neighbors in place, and China was a nuclear country, still now a nuclear country. And that is why India thought that India needs to demonstrate its nuclear capabilities. It successfully did so. And the operation is known as Smiling Buddha. You should remember this for your prelims. And the entire world was actually very concerned, because we understand that initially only the developed countries, including China, they had the nuclear weapon arsenal. Now if India is developing the same, then Pakistan will also develop the same, then North Korea will also develop the same, and they actually did so. So actually, the countries, the developed countries such as the US, even USSR, who was a good friend of India still now, right? UK, Canada, France, Japan and West Germany, they all were very concerned, and they impose some export controls on nuclear technology to all other states. And this was a very significant development, and they actually, all these countries, they actually gathered at London and decided the same. And that is why this is also known as the London Group, which eventually would become the Nuclear Suppliers Group. And here India is not a member to the Nuclear Suppliers Group. This essentially means that this group led by these countries, right now these countries include the names of Russia instead of USSR and Germany instead of West Germany. These countries are actually the suppliers of critical nuclear technologies to the rest of the world. But here the caveat is that in 2008, right, and after with the signing of the India-US nuclear agreement with the US, and also subsequently we find that India is also in agreement with Japan regarding the setting up of nuclear power plants. We find that India over a period of time, despite not being a member of the NSG or Nuclear Suppliers Group, it is also developing its nuclear program independently, hence increasing its deterrence. So we have to understand this is the, these are the major events that took place in the course of global nuclear order. And here we find that over a period of time we can evaluate the success or failure of the global nuclear order so far. So far we find that 75 years have been passed, since the development of the nuclear weapons and even the first nuclear weapon. Till now, can you tell me of any significant nuclear war that took place? No. It has been said that the entire global community so far has been successful in limiting the use of nuclear weapons during conflicts. We have seen many conflicts. Even right now we see a conflict which is going on between the West and the Russia, right? We see conflicts going on between USA and China. But are there any use of nuclear weapons? We also see conflicts between North Korea and the rest of the world, India, Pakistan, China. Are they using nuclear weapons? No, because they are aware of the disastrous or say dangerous repercussions of the same. So that is why also we can see, in additionally, only 4 countries, since say the NPT was signed, or say before and after, just before the after the NPT was signed, only 4 countries have developed or say gone nuclear, right? Israel, India, Pakistan and North Korea. So these are the only 4 countries. But actually in 1970s, after India actually experimented with nuclear weapons, the global community was very afraid that now all of the developing nations will be undergoing these nuclear tests. But only 4 countries so far have gone the same. And we have to see that this is a positive thing. Now the negative thing is that the arms control did not end the USSR nuclear race, because after the during the Cold War and even after the Cold War, the number of nuclear weapons with these 2 nations are the highest in the world, right? So despite the nuclear order and despite the various keywords we studied, the nuclear race is still not limited, right? Disarmament is still a dream which is far away. And that is why the various perspectives related to changing geopolitics also needs our attention right now, because right now we can see that the global nuclear order is on the decline due to some geopolitical or say geopolitics that we can see right now. We can understand right now we do not have a unipolar or say bipolar world, right? Generally, after the Cold War, the unipolar world led by the US would come into the fore, because after the collapse of the USSR, the US would remain the major power. Even now, it is one of the dominant forces. Then we can see, generally, if we consider the global order, it is being dominated by the US. So looking at the US and its acts for some time, we can see that US is right now facing a assertive China, which is on the rise. Both military and economically, they are on the rise. China is having one of the largest armies across the entire world, large number of defense investments, and also large number of economic activities in cases of exports, manufacturing, and so on. China is everywhere. And also, we find that China is increasingly, apart from military and political and say economic power, it is also becoming assertive regionally, right? In the Taiwan Straits, in the South China Sea, East China Sea, and beyond in the Pacific Oceans, and also beyond waters into continents such as Eastern Asia, Western Asia, Africa, even Latin America. It is trying to increase its political dominance, influence. And we have to find that, we have to understand that USA is not warming up to the same. Next, between the US and Russia, we find that US pulled out of many important nuclear strategic deals, such as in 2002, US withdrew from the anti-ballistic missile treaty between US and Russia. In 2019, it withdrew from the immediate range nuclear forces. Also in 2026, the New START treaty, which is also a very, very prominent treaty related to nuclear proliferation and military cooperation between the US and Russia, is going to expire in 2026. And also the recent Russia-Ukraine war, which is taking place specifically between the NATO forces and the Russian forces. We also find that US's nuclear policy have been very, very diplomatic. It has been playing to their own interests, or what it is known as a pragmatic streak. This means that US is actually playing to their own interests, right? And also in the words of a famous US ambassador, who is actually known by the name of Kissinger, he said that US has no permanent friends, only permanent interests. Right? And that is why we can see that US turned a blind eye when Israel went nuclear in 1960s, 70s, but was very active when India went nuclear, right? This dual stance. Also, when China helped Pakistan go nuclear in, say, program in 1980s, USA did not say anything. And finally, we also understand right now the recent development under the AUKUS scheme, where Australia, US, UK is actually present. Australia, which is a non-nuclear state, nuclear weapon state, that particular state is also bound into this arrangement because this particular deal is military in nature, and also exchange of nuclear submarines will also take place. So also this is going against the principles of non-proliferation treaty, right? Now also we find aspirations from the other parts of the world, such as South Korea, which is right now, according to recent domestic polls in South Korea, right, majority of the people is wanting a nuclear deterrence program. Also, we can understand relating Japan's decision to increase military expenditure. They are also seeing or seeking nuclear deals of some kind of time, and that is what is concerning right now, that maybe the global nuclear order is on a decline, and it is very, very shaky as to how the future consequences would be. Now, in the next article, this is another very, very important piece of article in the Hindu, which is actually looking at how the perspectives regarding slums and their development and the various initiatives for the same have changed since India's independence. Very, very important topic for GS1, where we need to study about poverty and the developmental issues, and also urbanizations and their problems and their remedies. Now here, looking at the very basic information, we have to understand what is a slum at the very first instant. See, slums are densely packed urban residential areas which are characterized by substandard housing, poor infrastructure, and limited access to basic services. We can understand these particular terms in more detail as in the features of a slum. See, particularly we know that there are many examples of slum in India. The most popular or say infamous example is the Dharvi, located at Mumbai, right? We find that there are many slums in many areas, in almost all of the urban areas of the country, and there are the defining features or the features that make a particular area as a slum. What are those? Particularly related to housing. Mainly the housing infrastructure is very unsafe and unhygienic. That means that the housing construction, right, is very unsafe because it is most of the times made of, say, mud, cardboards and very cheap building materials, and they are also very unhygienic because they are not generally adhering to municipal guidelines and rules and regulations. Next, we find that these areas are overcrowded, right? This is one of the features, and also cramped because the population density in this particular area can touch more than 1000 to 2000 per square kilometers, and this is also a very cause of concern. Then there is also a lack of security because mainly these areas can be the potential hotbed of illegal activities, and also rising cases of threats, murders, crimes, right, related to various aspects can be found here. Next, with respect to infrastructure, we find that the adequate infrastructure is not present here, be it with respect to, say, water services, electric services, or say proper roads and canals and everything, drainage patterns are totally non-existent, right? We also find limited transportation access, right, because mostly the lanes and bylanes of these slums are very dingy and very overcrowded, and that is why transportation access is also very difficult. Next, we find that the social and economic aspects of the same is also very limited because there is widespread poverty and unemployment in these particular regions, particularly because the people who reside belong to lower income categories, and their income generation capabilities are also not at par with the rest of the urban dwellers. Mostly they are serving as migrant workers or say as street peddlers, street hawkers, so their sources of incomes are very low, and hence they suffer a larger amount of poverty levels. Hence they suffer from poverty, and hence a vicious cycle of poverty breeds lack of education, healthcare, and lesser capabilities. And when I am using these words, capabilities, vicious cycle of poverty, please do use such words in your mains answers, because these are the words which examiners will be appreciating, right? And finally, we find that there are high levels of social stigma and discrimination also between these communities, because they can be coming from, say, lower caste, right? They can be coming from, say, various sections of the population which may be traditionally known as, say, maybe having faced discrimination, and that is the very sad reality of these particular slum areas, right? And that is why we find that the government of the day also have taken some initiatives regarding the same. Now we can find the highest slum population in states of Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, and so on, right? This is according to census 2011. And here the main discussion of this particular article is not regarding, say, the various issues and various schemes and policies that I have included separately, but the main debate or discussion in this particular article is regarding how the government's perspective regarding slums changed from, say, say 1950s to present times. Say it started from the 1950s. Actually, the author of this article, researched many parliamentary debates, and he found out that there have been various eras in which the slum areas were actually categorized or thought of different people by policymakers differently at different times of the eras. Now the very first, just after the independence, the development of slums were actually seen as the aftermath of partition, or say the influx of the number of refugees that may come from Pakistan or say eastern Pakistan, right? And that is why we find that in many areas of, say, Kolkata, Delhi, we have some jhopris, right, which were not traditionally slum areas, because the government of the day, they thought they could rehabilitate those people in those particular areas, right? And generally the government back then thought of these people as epidemics that need to be eradicated, right? So the nature or say the government approach towards slums was not very people friendly. They saw this as some threat. The development of slum areas and say the concerns related to health issues, space constraints and so on, or the issues that we discussed in the previous slide, the government thought these are just issues, right? And these need to be reduced proactively by the use of maybe force, by the use of law and regulations. And that is why the government did not understand back then that it was generally due to urban disparities, or maybe the cause of development of slum maybe is due to the lack of economic opportunity, the lack of poverty, the lack of people who are settling as migrants, but they do not have enough money to set up their enterprises. The government back then did not understand this thing. They understood this only as spatial constraints and health issues. And that is why in 1956, a very draconian act by the name of Slum Areas Act was actually set up, actually was passed, where the citizenship rights of the slum people were ignored, and also the demolition activities were also carried on. From 1970s and mid 1980s, this would be looked as a necessary evil that had to be developed, right? So we can see a little softening stance is developing, right? Now the government is still thinking those people as necessary evil, right? Very wrongly so, but they are still thinking as necessary evil, but they are thinking they need to be developed, right? But again, they focus more on town planning in this period of time. And when you are going on centralized town planning, you generally do not leave any areas for slum areas, right? If there are any slum areas, you would be demolishing the same, and that is why they too much emphasis on town planning instead of town development, right? This was the actually aftermath of the same, and that pushed the slums to the periphery or to the borders of the cities, and that made their condition even more worse. From the mid 1980s and 1990s, we can find there is actually some good news coming for the slum people. We can find that the National Commission on Urbanization was set up, where according to this particular report, they thought that they are not liabilities. The slum areas are assets, because they can be the labor force there, can be used in various areas, right? The slum development authorities in particular cities, they can develop the slum areas, and also they can convert maybe some particular areas into enterprises, factories, manufacturing industries and so on. Say local handicraft, traditional industries, food processing plants and so on. So they were thought of an asset. And that is why national housing policies which would follow also focused on town planning, but not that much of a centralized planning. Right now, housing policies were mainly focused on to rehabilitate the slum areas. And in 1996, the National Slum Development Program was also undertaken to particularly identify the people who are living in slums and also to develop those areas for economic activities. And finally, we understand the last phase is between 2000 and 2014, when for the very first time 2001 census focused on the enumeration of people living in slum areas. And here, having statistical information regarding the same would ensure that the people there would be counted that they are the population of India, and they would be having many government schemes for targeted specially for them, right? And this is also a very, very positive development. And also the various upgradation strategies and legal rights were also accorded, and also the changes that were made to previous rules and regulations, which are very draconian, were also taking place during the same period of time. And this brings us to the initiatives that the government has taken from 2000s to present, which is, according to the author, the fifth era of positivity or say positive perspective toward the slum areas, because we find various schemes. For example, we already discussed the National Slum Development Program. In addition, we also had the Valmiki Ambedkar Malina Basti Awas Yojana, specifically in the state of Maharashtra, to say settle the slum areas or say slum people into housing societies, right? into housing societies. Then we also have a basic program such as known as basic services to the urban poor. Here the urban poor, particularly living in slum areas, are given sources of employment. They are given food security. They are given shelter, right? They are given health services and so on by respective central government and state governments too. We also have integrated housing and slum development program, which is particularly looking at that housing development which we talked about. Earlier, the government was focused on town planning. Now that reduced and it focused more on housing the particular slum areas. Next, the government also provides interest subsidy scheme for housing the urban poor, right? Whenever the urban poor, particularly people who are living in slums, would be going to the banks for taking some loans, those loans will be given at very low interest rates to these people so that they can take loans and build proper houses, pakka houses, having good amount of facilities of electricity and every proper infrastructure that is needed for a basic dignified life. And finally, we sum up with a particular and a very famous initiative known as the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Housing for All Urban. This is actually providing soft loans and various credit information, various credit assistance to the urban poor, particularly to women who are living in slum areas, and giving loans to build, or also giving sometimes, right, transfer money to have proper accommodation in urban areas. So these are all the areas, or these are all the schemes that the government of the day is taking to solve the issues of the slums. And for urbanization topic of the UPSC, this is very, very important. In the next one, we find that this is regarding the Square Kilometre Array Observatory, and now India is a part of the world's largest, radio telescope project. The government approval for the same came up with a fund for around 1,250 crores because this SKAO or SCAO is actually a global treaty, and to join it, India need to sign and ratify the same. So for the ratification part, India or Indian government provided the fund of around 1,200 crores. Very, very important topic, particularly for GS3, because we need to study about the achievements of the Indians in space and technology, indigenization of technology, and developing new technology with respect to India. And in the last years, there have been many questions regarding the same. So let us know about this in depth. Now, the main objective of the SCAO, or the Square Kilometre Array Observatory, is to look into the intrigues of the space, because the space, right, the universe is always a never-ending piece of adventure and curiosity, right? It is told that till now, we do not know more than 99% of the things in the universe, or the stars, galaxies, planets, the nebulas, pulsars, magnetars, black holes, black matter, dark matter, dark energy, and so on. We do not have enough information as of now, right, in our human minds to inquire about the same. But like life, like in our life, nothing should stop us to pursue our goals and objectives. Should anything stop us from achieving our curiosity? No, right? And that is why over a period of time, the global community has ventured onto the moon, right? The mankind landed on the moon. We sent James Webb Space Telescope, which is looking into the vast depths of the space. We recently, as a country, also sent Chandrayaan missions into the moon, right? India sent many missions. And also, as of now, on very 1st January, India also launched the ExpoSat, which was also, all these things are actually also covered in the previous analyst sessions also. So please do definitely watch if you want to know more about those technologies. Now here, we will be talking about SCAO, because its main objectives, main scientific objectives, is to peer into the depths of the universe to understand how gravitational waves perform, or function. Gravitational waves are what? These are nothing. Just imagine a pond. Just imagine a pond and how maybe various objects on the pond float, right? A boat floats on the pond, a duck swims on the pond. If you will be going onto the, into the pond, you can swim on it, right? Just imagine that the universe is just that pond. Like you, like that duck, like that boat, there are the stars, planets, nebulas and black holes which are spread across this universal pond, right? And the ripples that arise out of the interaction of you with the pond, duck with the pond. You will feel that there are many ripples arising out of it, right? So the presence of huge objects such as planets, stars, they can, spread ripples across the entire universe, especially large massive objects such as very big stars and also black holes. They are so dense, so heavy that they exert a huge number of weight on that pond, right? And that is why they have larger amount of ripples sending all across the universe, particularly in cases where two black holes merge with themselves, they revolve with themselves, they create huge amount of ripples spreading all across the universe. And to detect those slight ripples, right, we already have one mission or say experiment known as the LIGO Observatory, right? Apart from that, we also need more sensitive equipments, right, to measure the slightest amount of ripples, because even if there is some small electronic signal interference, even there is some small noise that is coming from say the nearby village or city, that may interfere with the signals. So that is why this cow are actually a large number of radio telescopes or say just radio radars which are located on the surface of the land. There are hundreds of them located across continents which are located in very quiet locations so that there will be minimal disturbances to locate these ripples. And understanding these ripples is very, very important for the astronomical community. Then it is also about studying the nature of the universe and its evolution, how the universe came to life from the Big Bang and to right now. How it all came, it will be looking into the depths of the universe and also matching up observations with the present telescopes. Next, it will be also looking into the origin and evolution of cosmic magnetism. We know that Earth has a magnetic field, right? And that is what protects the sun's various sun flares, solar flares, so on, because the Earth's magnetic field is kind of protecting the same. Like the Earth has a magnetic field, the sun has a magnetic field, the nearby star has a magnetic field, the nearby planets of Jupiter, Neptune, and so on, they will be also having a magnetic field. So there is this cosmetic magnetism which is going on around the universe, and radio signals of varying frequencies will be helping us to understand those magnetic background that is prevalent all over the universe, and they will be also unlocking the information as to how black holes influence this particular phenomenon and so on. Next, it will be also looking into dark energy and dark matter, which is commonly held that is invisible to human eye. And it is also said that more than majority of the space is actually filled with dark matter and dark energy. If they are detected, the human community, they can build on or say they can use dark energy to run their energy requirements and say for future human curiosities too. And finally, the telescope will also look at the evolution of galaxies, how very young galaxies come, they mature, and eventually they also may collapse. So we can understand so far this is generally a research activity. And here let us look at the very details which can be useful for mains and prelims both. See, these are the radio telescopes of the SCOW, and they are located in fields where there is minimal level of disturbance because we have to capture the maximum of signals without any interference. And we can understand this is not a single telescope. It is an international organizational, right? In 2021 it was declared as an international organization because this is not a single telescope by a single country. This is actually headquartered in the UK, but actually many countries are part of the same, right? And that is why the world actually agreed to make it a convention or intergovernmental body. And India also signed and ratified the same. It is actually located, I told, in remote and very radio quiet, or radio quiet means the areas which do not have even the slightest of radio signals or any electromagnetic signals, the very isolated areas of the world. Generally, they are located in South Africa and Australia. So we can find that these are located all around the world, right? And here, India, through the Pune-based National Center for Radio Astrophysics, is going to oversee this particular program. This NCRA is actually a unit of the TIFR, or Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, which is a very, very renowned organization, particularly running out of the CSR funding of the Tata Group. It also operates the India's largest network. The TIFR, or the NCRA, is also operating the largest network of radio telescopes in India. This is actually known as Giant Meter, Meter Wave Radio Telescope near Pune. And this is also the GMRT, which is also the world's largest and most sensitive radio telescope, operating as low as 11,111 megahertz to around 1460 megahertz. So we can understand these are very, very sensitive radio telescopes. Now, India's potential in the same is that India is contributing to the development of this particular, scientific initiative, and some of the countries which are taking part, we can understand, are the UK, Australia, South Africa, Canada, China, France, India, Italy, and Germany. Right? India's main contribution to this particular mission will be in the form of neural networks, or the software, which will be typically running the telescope and interlinking all the telescopes on, say, South Africa and Australia, and also in Pune, right? So it will be actually synchronizing the software part through the use of neural network, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and so on, right? And also the Department of Atomic Energy is also going to construct the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, or introduce it at LIGO before. It will be establishing the same in the Hingoli district of Maharashtra. So these two developments, first the SCOW and then the LIGO India project, are poised to make or spearhead India into the front end of, say, the development of India's science and technology missions. In the next article, we will be looking at what are inoperative accounts, because recently the RBI has actually revised some of the guidelines for classifying the accounts and deposits as inoperative accounts and unclaimed deposits by the bank. But at the very beginning, we need to distinguish what do you mean by accounts and deposits. See, accounts are generally made by a person in a particular bank, right? When you go to the bank and you open your account, that is what account is, opening an account at the bank. Now, a person can have different kind of deposits in a particular bank. A person can be a business person, so she can have a current account. She can also have a savings account based on income from the business, and maybe she will be also investing the same. So maybe she will be also having a term deposit account, such as fixed deposits. So identifying accounts and deposits or distinguishing between the same is very, very important. So a person can have an account, and that person can have different deposits out of those accounts in a particular bank. Now, very, very important for economics this particular topic is, because we have to understand what are inoperative accounts here. See, inoperative accounts are those accounts where the bank's customer did not have any transaction over the last 2 years from that particular account, right? This is actually not actually bank-induced transactions. Such as bank-induced transactions may be the fees for your debit card, credit card, or say the amount of taxes on your interests, or say the various fines based on any, say, payment procedures and so on. These are the transaction based from the bank side. But what are the customer transactions, such as a daily UPI transaction, ATM withdrawals, card swipes, right? So these are the customer transactions. If they do not take place within 2 years, they are actually known as inoperative accounts. And the banks have to manage those inoperative accounts and to keep them secure, right? And what are unclaimed deposits? Now, deposits are different, I told you. Unclaimed deposits are those savings and current accounts which are not operated for 10 years. They have been not touched for 10 years. So there are many accounts, let me tell you, right? In India, there are more than 1.3 lakh crore rupees which are there in the inoperative bank accounts, and many of them are under savings and current and term deposits too. Now, what are term deposits which are unclaimed? Which are not claimed for around 10 years from the date of maturity. So these are actually, unclaimed deposits. Now, what are the revised guidelines? It said that the annual review with respect to these inoperative accounts must take place so that customers can be identified and they must be informed that their bank accounts are being inoperative. And if there are any inoperative accounts, or say if any customer is found to be inoperative, they must be communicated and they must be told that to activate or reactivate their accounts, they need to file KYC documents, and also they must be doing some video conferencing at their bank branches, not only at their original branches but from any other branch. It is very possible. Next, there are no charges for any activation, right? If there are inoperative accounts, no charges, it will be activated free of cost, but it must be submitting the KYC requirement or video conferencing protocols. Next, interest on savings accounts will be continued, right? They must be given, right? And no fines must be, imposed. Then, which accounts cannot be ever classified as inoperative accounts? There are some accounts such as zero balance accounts for beneficiaries, students for scholarships, because these particular bank accounts are generally maybe say not operative for 1 year or 2 years, because maybe these people do not know how to use a bank account, or maybe they do not use bank accounts too much, but they need those subsidies of say PM Kisan, they need scholarships, so they cannot be classified as inoperative accounts. These are these zero balance accounts. So be very careful. If in prelims they are asking that all accounts under say which are not operative for 2 years will be classified as inoperative, so that will be wrong. And finally, we come to the final topic, that is the designation of a terrorist under the UAPA provision, because recently a gangster has been designated as a terrorist under the UAPA of 2019 amendment. It is very, very important for India's polity and governance. So let us briefly look at what the entire thing is. See, the word terror or terrorist under the UAPA are not defined, but UAPA defines a terrorist act. It defines that any act committed with intent to threaten or likely to threaten the unity, integrity, security, economic security or sovereignty of India, or with intent to strike terror or likely to strike terror, very, very important word, likely to strike terror, in the people or any section of the people in India or any foreign country. So we can understand the designation of terrorists of individuals and organization rests with the central government, and here the person can be a terrorist or may be a terrorist, and they can be convicted of the same, they can be declared the same if they possess threat or internal security threat to India, or also they are possessing the same threat based from a foreign soil too. That is also a very, very valid ground. Now, how the individuals are declared as terrorists? Through a notification in the official gazette, it will be added. Then the name will be added to the 4th schedule of the UAPA. This is very, very important. And here, when the name is being added, no opportunity will be heard before such designation. After such designation, the particular person can make an application to the particular government for the removal of the same and review of the same. Based on that, a particular review committee may be set up, which will be led by a retired or sitting High Court judge and other 3 members. If the review committee finds that this designation is arbitrary or say unlawful, right, it can be even removed, right? But if it is based on evidences, if the center have evidence, right, it may not, it will not definitely, right? After this, the particular person, he can also go to the courts such as High Court and the Supreme Courts to challenge the decision of the central government as designation of a terrorist. So let me tell you, the UAPA designation of terrorist is not final. The person can challenge the same before a court of law. So this was all for today. I thank you all for being a very, very patient audience, and till we meet again, all the best. Thank you.